Welcome, everyone. I would like to acknowledge that we're meeting today on the lands of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, the traditional owners of the land on which this event is taking place, and acknowledge any First Nations people with us today. I pay my respects to their elders, past and present. I'd like to also add that today is quite a momentous day in the nation's history. Voting in the referendum has now closed. And for those of you, both First Nations and non-First Nations attendees, for whom this referendum has sparked heightened emotions, I wish for you peace in the days and weeks and months and years ahead. I'm very excited to be moderating this event with Rebecca Makkai and Suzie Miller for the Wheeler Centre. And the Centre is proud to be working with RMIT Culture to present this event at the Capital as part of Spring Fling, supported by the Victorian State Government through Creative Victoria and the Melbourne City Revitalisation Fund. RMIT Culture unites the university's creative programs and cultural collections, as well as the university's public cultural spaces, including the incredible Capitol Theatre that we're in today, and it offers a curated program dedicated to building a community of culture and ideas. Special thanks to Spring Fling bookselling partner Readings and accommodation partner The Sofitel. Bit about me quickly, I'm Rachael Brown. I've been working at the ABC for the past 21 years, but most recently in the investigative journalism podcast space. So Rebecca Mackay's novel is very much in my wheelhouse. I created the podcast Trace. The first series revisited the 1980 cold case of Maria James and sparked a new coronial inquiry. And the second series looked into Melbourne's Lawyer X, Nicola Gobbo, the defence barrister for many of Melbourne's prominent gangland players, but who was also working secretly as a police informant. I'm very excited to introduce to you first up Suzie Miller, international playwright, screenwriter and novelist. She's educated in science and law with doctorates in drama and mathematics. She practiced human rights law before turning to writing full-time. Her smash hit one-woman play, Prima Facie, enjoyed a sold-out run on London's West End, won the Olivier Award for Best New Play this year, and opened on Broadway. Prima Facie is about a defence barrister who specialises in defending men accused of sexual assault until she's assaulted herself. This blistering play has now been turned into a book, and we have the pleasure of hearing some of it from Suzie herself. Welcome, Suzie Miller.
Thank you, Rachel, and thanks everyone for being here. It's such a momentous day in Australia, and I know we're all really aware of that, so we're sort of holding our breath to see what the outcome is. As Rachel just explained, this was once a play, so having it read in a theatre is kind of amazing. Having said that, the last person that said some of the words, not all of the words, but some of the words that were in the theatre production was Jodie Comer, so I'm a little bit nervous if anyone saw the NT Live version. Anyway, it is very different because it's the book, and at the moment, where I'm going to do the reading from is Tessa, who's the protagonist of the book, is a sort of 30-something young defence barrister from a working-class background. She has now absolutely faked it till she'd made it in terms of just being one of the crowd at the bar. She's working in the Old Bailey. And she has a client that's been arrested and is on trial for having assaulted and robbed a very wealthy man at a bar, but there's a lot more to the story that she knows about. I am starting the read midway through her cross-examination of this man who is quite disregarding of her and thinks he's got it in the bag already. So he's the witness, the man she's cross-examining, and her client is Tony. I let the witness talk, over-talk. I let the witness clarify. Good, thanks for that, sir. I wasn't sure. He goes further. He's in his element. His eyes dismiss me. This one must be straight out of uni or something. She's not that good, he thinks. He's putty in my hands now. He relaxes, thinks he has the upper hand, and so now he is not careful, not afraid, no longer vigilant. He says something inconsistent. I nod and look confused. Let him explain it to me. But inside I am on alert. This is the break in his serve. This is where I take my lead. He's explaining, and I'm nodding as he digs himself in further. Okay, I see, that's a bit clearer now. Oh, he volunteers more information. It's all too easy. He has talked himself into a total mess. I dare to turn and momentarily clock the prosecutor. I see him put a finger to his forehead. Yes, he knows, and I know. But the guy about to bury himself doesn't know. He talks on and on and on. In my mind's eye, I am circling him, nodding approval. I ask for further clarification. The witness is so obliging. He is helping the woman out. I quickly check the judge. My face is a mask, but the judge knows. Turn back to the witness. There is blood in the water, and I let the witness swim in. He has gone beyond the point of no return. No one can help him now. When he's done, he sits back, a flash of confidence across his face. I let him feel his control, feel in charge of the moment. I let him indulge in feeling safe and secure. Then I breathe in and out, remind myself to tiptoe through the next bit, really pace the impact. The witness crosses his arms. I have stopped flicking through pages. I am standing very still, yet I am circling him. The judge and the other lawyers know what's coming. They silently cringe for him, but they love it. They lean forward. The people in the public gallery are a little bored. They see the incompetence in me, someone lost. They have no idea what is happening. And the witness, there in the witness box, the man I'm talking to, he still has no clue. No fucking clue. I'm sorry, but just to clarify, I do have one more question. I hope you don't mind. It will help me out to get the full picture. The smallest of eye rolls from the witness. Perfect. This is exactly where I need him. But if the witness were watching the prosecutor, the guy sitting next to me at the bar table, he'd sense something is amiss. The prosecutor turns his face down towards the bar table. I stop moving, stop paper shuffling, stop fawning confusion. I look right at the witness. I ask my question. A strange movement crosses his face. He looks to the prosecutor for reassurance. The prosecutor can't say anything, but his eyes, they are begging him to be careful, begging the witness not to fall into the trap laid out before him. I see all this, and then I fire 4 questions like bullets at the witness. Bang, 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 bang. His face registers the shock. Utter annihilation. He looks at me. For the first time, this witness sees me, sees who I really am. I watch the slow dawning, followed by fury at me, at being taken for a ride. I stand up tall, let him see my power. He thought he had this, but here I am. I liked that he had dismissed me. I liked that he had rolled his eyes, decided I was lousy at my job. I like it all for this moment where I have won the game, and he is forced to look at me and to realise he had completely underestimated who he was dealing with. He doesn't like it. I watch the witness sweat as he thinks of an answer. The people in the gallery are not bored anymore. They have just seen a cross-examine in action, one as brilliant as they see on television. I can feel the shift in them. They are now looking at me with respect, curiosity. She's good. I'm not done yet. Answer the question, please, Mr. Bateman. I say this in the most professional voice I have. The witness does not speak. I relish this last moment and take my time. The prosecutor has his head down, almost touching the bar table. His case destroyed. He knows it, I know it, and the judge knows it. But the performance must reach its finale. I press on in the sweetest voice I can muster. Your Honour, the witness is not answering my question. The judge reminds Mr. Bateman that he must answer the question. I turn to Mr. Bateman and wait. He is cornered, and I wait. He mumbles something, I lean in. I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. The judge speaks wearily. You must speak into the microphone for the recording, Mr. Bateman. I gesture to the witness to bring the microphone closer to his face, smiling benevolently. By now, Mr. Bateman is very wary of me. He answers, yes, I was. So your answer is a yes then, sir. The judge has had enough. The man is destroyed and tells me I have my answer. I do, and I like it. The prosecutor shakes his head when he is asked whether he will re-examine. He doesn't even stand. There's nothing he could do to save his case. The judge lets the witness go, and as he leaves the witness box, he tries to make eye contact with the prosecutor. What just happened? He's confused, fumbling. He's enraged with me. His face is shaken as he walks past me. He has no idea what just went down. It's not emotional for me. It's just the game of law. I stand up again and request that the case against my client be dismissed. Tony doesn't know what is happening, but he senses it's good. I address the judge, neutral. I submit that there's no case to answer, Your Honour. The judge is swift. He dismisses the case. He turns and explains to Tony that the case cannot be proved and that he, Tony, is free to go. Tony shakes his head, beams, but he doesn't walk from the dock until I beckon to him. As I pack up my paperwork, I turn and nod to his mother. She also stands to leave. The barrister's rule is you can't flaunt a win. Every winner might lose the next day. We don't even call it losing. We call it coming second. Today, the prosecutor came second. I nod a thank you and acknowledge the prosecutor, try not to make eye contact, put my papers in my satchel and cross it over my chest, undo my suit jacket and make my way towards the door of the courtroom. Everyone who saw me win is watching me. I saunter. Mentally cue applause. It feels good. When I get to the door, I turn, nod to the judge. Tony and his mother are on either side of me. I motion for them to nod too, and they do. This big thug of a man and his mum are in my thrall. I am the one who leads the way through this strange system, puts them on a path home. When we are outside the courtroom, I dare to strip away the artifice. Not all of it, though. They need me to still be in charge. Tony, you can brush your teeth at home now. Tony looks at me questioning. You're free to go home, Tony. They didn't have a case. It's all over. I realise Tony and his mother, despite hearing the judge dismiss the case, still do not quite know the outcome. Tony's mother bursts into tears. She grabs my hand and puts it to her heart. There's suddenly a warmth and a strange closeness towards this mother and her son. It's too familiar. I start to falter. This mother, her boy, such love between them. Her relief is so palpable. I wonder how many sleepless nights she has had worrying about what would happen today. I also wonder how she can bear it. There will be another time for Tony in court. Of that I have no doubt. But for today she can take her boy home. Tony's mum is not letting go of my hand. I put my other hand over hers and gently take it off her chest, gradually releasing her grip. I must run. Another case to prepare. Keep it professional. I turn to Tony. As for you, I don't want to see you in here ever again. I say this to a grown man, to someone towering over me. I say this to Tony, still in his badly ironed shirt, sweat marks now under each arm. He nods almost violently. He won't be here again, he is sure. I'm not. But in this moment, he grabs my hand and shakes it. This giant thug of a man is filled with respect for me. In this moment, I have power.
Thank you very much, Suzie Miller. This was a very fitting opening for this event because Prima Facie speaks to power and the loss of it, which is a core theme of I Have Some Questions for You. So I'm delighted to introduce to you Rebecca Makkai. She lives outside Chicago with her husband and 2 daughters and is the author of 5 works of fiction. One, The Great Believers, is set at the height of the AIDS epidemic. That was a finalist for the 2019 Pulitzer Prize. This one that we're all here to talk about follows a protagonist, Bodie Kane, a successful professor and podcaster, who's invited back to teach a course at her old boarding school, Granby, in New Hampshire. And it was at Granby where her roommate, Thalia Keith, was murdered and the school's athletic trainer, Omar Evans, was convicted for it. But did police get the right guy? I'd like to introduce to you Rebecca Makkai.
Thank you.
No worries. We're very lucky to have you here today. I absolutely loved the book for reasons we'll get into. It plays around a lot with the idea of power and imbalances and shifts in power within the mediums of gender politics, age, class, race, and within institutions like the legal fraternity and academia. And I'll touch on all these themes because structurally I was amazed how you wove them all together. But let's start with abuses of power. What were you keen to convey in terms of the range of abuses and assaults that women face?
Yeah, I don't tend to go into a novel with a certain thesis statement or a certain thing that I want to say. But I definitely go in with things I want to examine, right? Questions that I have, questions that rather than solving them, I actually just want to complicate them. And these were things that were on my mind. I was writing this book I tend to think about a book for about a year before I write anything. So thinking about it in 2018, which is right when Me Too stuff was getting started. And I just thought, I'm going to write a book about someone looking back on boarding school. And, there'll be, there's this murder. It'll be a good story. Every time I start a book, I think this is going to be the fun, easy one that I'm going to write this time.
There's no such thing.
No, I know. But all those questions that I had about Me Too, all the looking back that we were all doing on big things as well as little things, and individual things as well as systemic things, and it wasn't simple answers. There were cases where you go, oh, but that one's different. Oh, but that one does that go too far? I don't know. I wanted to look at all that stuff directly. I essentially, this always happens to me. I try to tell the simple, nice, fun story, and I try to write about just one thing, and it ends up being about 17 things. And it also ends up being, much more resonant, maybe, I hope, than I had intended. I just want to tell the one story, and I end up writing about broad thematic things that kind of came about subconsciously. So I'm almost not answering your question, but I in the end, I really do want the book, and I think it does, to ask about, when we fixate on a certain story in the media, right? Like, oh, this one lurid, the details of this one murder. What are we actually talking about in terms of the systems of power, who has power, who gets to control the narrative? How does race play into it? It very often does. How does gender play into it? It very often does. Whose stories get sensationalized, whose stories capture the public attention, whose don't. And I wanted to look at the exact kind of case that would become clickbait, right? Young, beautiful, wealthy girl, boarding school. And I wanted to look at it through a realist lens. What are we actually talking about? How would this really play out for the people involved and not just for the casual consumer?
I might get you to read a section of it because there's a very, hands up firstly, who's read the book so far? Yeah.
Okay, wow.
Great.
Thank you, guys.
Here.
Oh my God.
Well, you'll all know there's a very clever...
We'll be careful with spoilers though, because that wasn't everybody.
Very clever stylistic device that Rebecca employs of chapters peppered through of cases of murder and abuse that people remember only in snippets, which is what you were just talking to.
Yeah.
I'll just get you to read the first bit of it.
Fantastic. Yeah, okay. So I'm reading here and here. Okay.
Correct.
Sometimes they know her right away. Sometimes they ask, wasn't that the one where the guy kept her in the basement? No, it was not. Wasn't it the one where she was stabbed in? No. The one where she got in a cab with different girl. The one where she went to the frat party. The one where he used a stick. The one where he used a hammer. The one where she picked him up from rehab and no. The one where he'd been watching her jog every day? The one where she made the mistake of telling him her period was late? The one with the uncle? Wait, the other one with the uncle? No, it was the one with the swimming pool. The one with the alcohol in, with her hair around, with the guy who confessed to, right, yes. The one from the boarding school, they say. I remember the one from the video. You knew her?
Thank you.
Sure.
In this book, the cumulative effect is devastating. In Australia, 1 woman a week is killed by their current or former partner. In America, it's much worse. I think it's 3 women a day.
Good Lord.
Now, these lists of atrocities, what gave you this idea? And I mean, you touched on it earlier, but what were you hoping to achieve?
Yeah, so there are these lists, right, that kind of go throughout the book, and that they change through the book what they are. So I'll tell you first how it came about, because it came about as a response to a problem I was facing. I have this character. She's 40. I'm putting her back, at her boarding school, so she's going to be pulled back between the successful adult she is and the kid she was, but I need other ways, too, to destabilize her. And so I really wanted for there to be a story in the news, something that people would be obsessed with for days. This was coming shortly after in the US, this Supreme Court Justice, Brett Kavanaugh, this woman testifying about assault on TV all day. Everyone's watching it, and then nothing happens, and we're all just going out of our minds. I wanted something like that to be throwing her off. My problem was I didn't want to talk about a real case like that, which is going to just steer the book in this one specific direction. And I didn't want to invent something, because then I'd have to invent all the details of it, and it would take away from the details of the other story I'm inventing, which is my main plot. So I had this scene where I wanted her to be watching TV, watching the news, and my way through this conundrum was to say, okay, what if she refuses to tell us which one it is, because it's all of them. It doesn't even matter. It's all of them. And she's just going to list them all. So I wrote that scene, and I liked it a lot. It echoed for me this idea of the litanies, I think, those lists we all have of certain types of case, certain types of story. So, violence against women is definitely one. In the US, mass shootings and police brutality are 2 others where, you hear a news story and you're like, oh, it's one of those, or, there are ones you remember and ones you don't remember. And it just is this cascade. I liked that effect, but you can't just do something like that once. So then I had to weave it throughout, including opening the book with it. But that sense of, okay, this is one of these stories that you have heard of. You're complicit in this. We're all complicit in this. Even though it's fiction, we're going to pretend that it's not. And not only are you complicit, but we're all part of this kind of overload, this deluge, and you stop. You can forget that these are individual people, that these are individual cases, when it becomes more just this cultural phenomenon. Mm-hmm.
And it touches on cancel culture as well. Bodhi's husband is publicly accused of predatory behaviour in a relationship with a younger woman. And I found it really interesting how you played out this event with her memories of her relationship with a teacher, Mr. Block, and their relationship she initially remembers as pure, but her husband's accuser she thinks is, using and weaponising a victim narrative to gain attention and status. So I was wondering, how is the prism of today's post-Me Too movement, along with social media, shaping how public opinion forms and evolves when alleged crimes are made public?
Well, I think one of the things I really was dealing with there that I was interested in was the way we've lost a bit of a sense of nuance, or we've lost the ability to be comfortable, I think, with contradiction. In that regard. And mostly, I think this has mostly been a tremendously good thing, all of this coming out with these stories, talking about this, holding people accountable. But it's not without conflict. It's not without contradiction. And that's not the kind of conversation you can have online very easily, right? The case where you go, oh, that goes too far. I'm not going to come out and say that on Twitter. Oh my God. And, but you kind of say to a friend, like, well, but is that the same? You don't want to betray the cause, but you also don't want to dilute the cause, right? So that was something that I really wanted to, look directly at, address, mess with, think about. I also, didn't want to be beating the reader over the head with, here's a book about all these men who all did bad things, and we're going to try to hold them accountable. I wanted there to be plenty of good men in the book, and I wanted there to be maybe that contradiction of, well, what is accountability? Are we the same people that we were? What if the world changes? What if the times change? How does that work?
This novel is a really intense look at true crime and where we're at with it. And so these questions, selfishly, I most wanted to ask you. This is my wheelhouse, and I get asked this a lot, and I wonder what your take on it is. But why do you think audiences find true crime content so interesting and so therapeutic? Because I'm never able to answer that question.
Yeah, okay, I've been asked this a lot too, so I have an answer. I have a theory. Because we know this is as old as humanity, right? We have a lot more ways to, in the modern age, you can spend all day doing a deep dive about something, whereas before you'd have to wait for the paper. But my theory is that it's evolutionary. I think that for most of human history, we're traveling these packs of, 150 people going around, and if your friend is dead, you probably want to figure out what happened. Is someone else here to blame and you need to kick them out? Or did he eat the berries from that bush that he's lying under? And you should be sure that you never do that. It's integral to survival, right? You have this instinct kick in of I have to figure out, I have to solve this. Especially I think for women, because there's that self-protective, how do I keep this from happening? Maybe if I figure out exactly what happened, I can keep it from happening to me. So I think that's what it is. And I think that just, then now, instead of knowing 142 other people in your life, you have access to 7 billion people's stories if they're juicy enough, which is probably not the healthiest, right? It's also, I think just, people love a mystery. Who doesn't love a mystery? And I think the kind of mystery with true crime, it's one thing, you read an Agatha Christie novel, and there's only, you can either figure out the clues or you can't, but the book's the book. With true crime, maybe there's that one, that 0.00001% chance that you could notice something, you could post something, and the right person could see it. That's very alluring. And there's just also, kind of the rubbernecking of what happened. But I am very drawn to certain stories like that. Certain ones I'm absolutely not drawn to. But where there's mystery involved, especially, I tend to be very drawn to it, and then I tend to really question why and wonder whether, obviously, in cases like what you've been doing, there's tremendous good that can come out of this kind of attention. There's also tremendous harm that can come out of irresponsible uses of this kind of media, where people, re-victimize families or harass suspects or tromp all over the crime scene. It can be both of those things as a genre.
I read a really interesting article recently by author Bree Lee, who said this about true crime, and I wanted to read it to everyone. Everyone who engages with true crime has some kind of conflict of interest. No one arrives at the material with totally clean hands and altruistic intentions. Now, that set me off on days of soul-searching about my work and whether I should still be doing it. But with Trace, I do think I did arrive at it with clean hands, because my purpose was trying to find answers for the James brothers, the sons of the victim, Maria James. So I do think it might be rare, but I do think it's possible that content makers can come at true crime with clean hands. But I was curious to hear your take on it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, something that the proliferation of true crime media has allowed, it has allowed for the highlighting of more marginalized victims, just stories that weren't going to make it onto TV. They're not telegenic enough, they're not splashy enough. It's also allowed for cold cases to be re-examined, where police departments don't have the resources or the energy. They don't want to go and unsolve their own cases. But so many cold cases, now that the technology has changed, can be solved or people can be exonerated. The Innocence Project work going on in so many of these cases, which is, of course, something I got very interested in with this book. There's, and just things like, podcasts where they go, okay, this is a cold case from 1972. If you lived in Hawaii in 1972, we're going to throw up these pictures online of this Jane Doe, see if you know anything. That's not something that was possible in 1972, particularly. So there, I think there can be, I'm a defender of the responsible vein of this stuff, definitely.
Perfect segue, thank you. Because I want to, in terms of audiences, an article in The New Yorker recently spoke to the gamification of true crime, saying the internet has added a new dimension to the persistent fascination with crime stories. It has made the genre participatory. Now, I saw that element, perhaps naively, when I did mine as groundbreaking, because for the reasons you were saying that, I could invite new leads that could help me alert me to avenues that perhaps law enforcement couldn't or wouldn't investigate. And it ended up sparking a new coronial inquest. But I have seen the other side, where public participation can be problematic.
Yeah.
What kind of cases have you seen where it's...
Well, there was the one in England last year where a woman just kind of went missing by a creek, and her phone was found there on the bench and her dog. And people just walked all over this, like any footprints that were there are long gone now. I was really interested in researching the book. I was interested in kind of high school-based cases and what happens years later to these people. There was a case in Ohio where this young woman was killed in her boyfriend's backyard, and it's pretty clear that either her boyfriend or this really creepy guy at their school did it. Neither of them was ever imprisoned. Both of them were suspects. And obviously, one of them is innocent. You just don't know which one. But they've both been harassed. One of them died quite young, I think, as a result of some of drinking related to this, and that happened in 1991 maybe, and so there was this moment, and then it died out, and now the past 10 years, these people who are now adults, living their lives, one of them is innocent, at least one of them is innocent, are now getting harassed, and 50% of people think it's one guy, 50% the other, and they're not going to leave them alone.
Do you have a theory?
I don't. It's such a complicated. Oh my God. Yeah.
Okay.
If you're interested, it's Lisa Pruitt in Shaker Heights, Ohio. It's like you'll spend all weekend. Is the problem.
I'm having a breather. Thanks. The ending of this book, it broke me. To be fair, it hit very close to home. In my kind of work, I'm all too familiar with injustice because certain people or certain institutions didn't do their job properly or just didn't care enough. So I want to read you all a section, and this is at the end of the book. And this would be a spoiler, but I think you've all read it, so...
Well, not everyone, but we'll still... unless it literally says, and here's what happened.
No,
okay, there we go.
I don't think so. Stop me.
I think we're still okay. You could also plug your ears if you really need to. You got to, at least.
Jeff said, the fucker's going to get away with it. Even if Omar got off, they're never going after Sereno. I don't see it. Yav said so too on the phone. There's no case against him. I said, well, there was no case against Omar either. Yes, well... Fran was the one who showed me the video online from that morning. Amy marched outside the state prison, her face exhausted, but her eyes fierce. She said, the victory we've achieved is that Omar knows there are so many people who believe him. He told me that's what he's thankful for, the growing number of people who understand his innocence. who will continue to fight for his freedom. He's ready for the battle ahead. Now, this novel asks if the conviction of the athletic trainer, Omar Evans, was fair. Do you see a lot of this, of class and privilege affecting investigations and influencing convictions?
Yeah. I went into this, like I said, the great thing is there really weren't spoilers there because you didn't actually, so that was good. It was well done. I went into this wanting, like I said, a really realist lens, right? I did not want the, TV drama, it's all wrapped up. The person confesses on the stand. Oh my God, here's the evidence version. And the more I dug in on the realities of what was possible, what was likely, the more frustrating and horrifying it got, of course, right? I was working closely with a public defender from the state of New Hampshire because I needed, those very specific laws, and she was amazing. I originally really wanted, I thought it'll be a retrial. And then the more I dug, just even to get to a retrial, what are the steps you have to go through? And, ultimately landed on maybe there's, and not a huge spoiler, don't worry, but is there a hearing for a retrial instead? And I asked this lawyer, I said, what are the, what is the likely outcomes? And she was like, well, in the state of New Hampshire in the past 50 years, there's been one person who won their hearing for a retrial. And she's and she was the one who did it.
Yeah.
I was, oh, okay. So this is, the stuff you see on TV, it's not real.
Yeah.
And, the more, of course, race is a huge factor. Black men in the US, and I'm sure elsewhere, are disproportionately among those eventually exonerated, so we can extrapolate, disproportionately among those falsely imprisoned. There are also major economic factors in who can afford what kind of defense. And in this case, I was also interested in what happens when a very wealthy institution, like a school, is putting pressure on, New Hampshire is a tiny state and it's actually very poor. So you have a number of incredibly wealthy universities and boarding schools that could practically buy the rest of the state. So what does that balance do?
And also institutions and police forces and courts don't like undoing their own mistakes, do they?
Sorry, say that again?
Certain institutions like police forces and courts don't like unpicking their own mistakes.
Oh, yes, exactly, right. Yeah, the last thing they want. Let alone the last thing they want to spend time and money on. Right, those are your numbers. Someone's always up for re-election, some judge, some sheriff, and it is the thing that you want a month before the election. Oh, we just unsolved a case. Great. Yeah.
It raises this novel very interesting ideas on memory, both personal memory and collective memory. It's something you played around with really cleverly. You have this great line, for a teenager, being seen as a certain way is as good as being that way. And soon your vision becomes part of my self-image. Do you think after having done this, is it ever possible to see yourself clearly as a younger person?
Oh, God. That's a great question. No, definitely not. I don't think it's ever possible to see yourself clearly at any age, right? It's so funny because fundamentally, I think when you're an adolescent, it's one of the least self-aware times for anyone. It's also the time when you're trying on multiple different personalities, and you really don't fully understand the effect you have on other people. At the same time, who you were, how you saw yourself as an adolescent, informs the rest of your life profoundly. It takes up so much more room in our memories, in our conception of self, than other periods of your life do, right? The period from 13 to 18 or so, compared to, say, your 20s. You might remember, you usually remember more from that time. You remember music better, all that stuff, but you also just, you were unpopular for 1 year of high school, and that informs your life forever. You just see yourself that way forever. It's something I was thinking a lot about, not only thinking back in that Me Too sense, but just going, okay, I'm going to invite myself to really think back on who I was at this time in my life. It's funny because one of the questions I get very often is, well, why did you go with the common trope of making her such an outsider? It's like, who the hell was not an outsider?
No, she was
at
in
that
a
age?
very privileged institution.
Well, yeah, right. And I mean, raise your hand if you considered yourself an insider as a teenager. My God, who would that even be? And she, she was in some fundamental ways, and in others she was not. And one of the major things she needs to realize over the course of the book is to what an extent she was a part of these systems, that she felt like she was, stepped on. And to some extent was, by these systems of privilege and power. She was also very much a part of the systems of privilege and power.
I'll jump to that because this is a bit that I liked, that I sometimes disliked her because there's times she's not honest with herself about how much she wanted the podcast to be out there. Mr. Block's attention seemed to me fine when it was directed at her, not when it was directed at Thalia, which I found really interesting. And she, as you mentioned, constantly cast herself as an outsider, yet she was part of this Granby institution. How important do you think a story is to have flawed, and I would argue sometimes hypocritical narrators?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be wildly dishonest to try to come up with a protagonist who's unflawed, first of all. Also, we wouldn't like them. If you met someone in real life who was perfect, you wouldn't even like them. And I'm just not that interested in it. I'm interested in, I don't write characters who are very much like me, for the most part. Bodhi has some things in common with me. I gave her my high school graduation year, aligned myself with her generationally, and, a few other things. But she's definitely not me. But I like to kind of, when you write a character, you sort of tap into some weird corner of yourself. And hopefully a weird, an interesting corner of yourself, one that is in conflict with the rest of you. You kind of take that, like maybe that grain of, what is this about myself? I don't really like this about myself. And then blow it up very large and put it there in that character and see what it can do on its own. I have fun with that.
And I've read that stories and books that kind of disturb you and unsettle you in some way. You like reading books like that, so I'm guessing you were trying to unsettle readers.
Oh, yeah. Right, you want something with some
meat.
Yeah, some meat, or just some like counterbalance, right? It's like, you're eating a meal and you want acid in there. You don't just want all sugar and fat all the time, right? Like some salt, some acid. And yeah, I love particularly narratives where the narrative itself unsettles me, meaning it breaks its own rules. We're not just going along in one mode. It turns out that we've been tricked in some way, or that suddenly we're changing to another perspective when I didn't expect it. I'm not trying to take people for a roller coaster ride that way, but I have fun messing a little bit with the reader and myself. I want to mess with myself.
The narrative style of this book is so interesting because it's a kind of a marriage of numerous literary devices, which in another person's hands could have been a complete mess. But I thought your command of them was excellent, and it really makes the novel sing. As readers of the book would know, there are switches in time. There's Bodhi's imagining of alternate versions of Thalia's death. And you sometimes also write in second person, which drives some of the mystery, which I loved. I might read you all an example of that now. I wasn't furious with you yet. That would come later. For now, you were simply an audience. Don't be flattered. I didn't understand yet that I was there on your tail, that I wanted answers from you, on your trail, sorry, that I wanted answers from you. But the subconscious has a funny way of working things out. The structural differences in the texture, did that come naturally when you were writing it, or did you to work with all the themes that you've spoken about in this talk, that was the only way to weave them all together?
Yeah, essentially, in the early phases of writing, there's a lot of, just throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks. And, you try way too many things. There's no way you would include those all. And also some of them simply don't work. The ones that do, that you like, and you go, okay, I like it. Is it serving the whole story? Can I really go somewhere with this? Let's see what happens. So, I have those lists for one thing. I talked about how those came about. The second person was really that I was writing, and at the end of the first full chapter, I just kind of found myself pivoting to the second person and going, okay, what if she's talking to this guy? Just kind of wrote it, and then went, I don't know, I like it. We'll see what we could do with that. And then you start thinking, okay, what does this do within the text? Well, it implicates the reader a little bit more, because you see that word you on the page, and it's not you, but you also means you, right? Do I like that? Do I not like that? I think I like it. Other things, there's a lot of trial and error. So there are these sections throughout where Bodhi starts with imagining, okay, here is the official version of events. Can I really picture this scenario where this athletic trainer murdered this girl, and here's what happened, and tries to think her way through it? And then subsequent ones, right, it's like, well, no, okay, what if it was actually this person? Originally, those were all together in one big clump in the middle of the book,
right,
between the 2018 section and the 2022 section. And my idea there was, okay, you've read through her return to campus, and now you're going to start reading. You're not even going to know what you're reading. You're going to start reading, and it looks like this is the real version of events.
Okay.
But then I'm going to go, never mind, maybe it was this, right? If you guys ever, the movie Clue from like the 1980s.
I loved that movie,
okay,
yeah.
And the way that it came out on like VHS when I was a kid was, we got to the end, and it was like, that ends, and it's like, well, that's maybe how it happened, or maybe it happened like this. I didn't recognize the influence as I was doing this, but in retrospect, I was trying to write Clue. When it did not work. Clue works very well. This did not work here. But those just weighed this book down in the middle. It was like hanging a huge weight in the middle of a clothesline. My editor wanted me to cut them completely originally. And I did not feel like that was the answer. I really, I wanted those there. I wanted us to walk through these scenarios so that in the end, and I'm being cryptic, when we do really basically know what happened, we have a reference point for how that might have gone down from earlier, right? So it's like, oh, okay, that part couldn't have happened, but this part, yeah, this might be what happened. So, then my solution is to thread them throughout.
It was good peppered through, because it was also reminiscent of like Reddit or blogs or posts when everyone jumps on about a podcast and says, oh, what about this? And this might have happened. And,
right,
That I want to throw to some questions from the audience. We've got about 10 minutes to go. So ushers will be walking around with some microphones.
And we'll try to be pretty spoiler-free still, if you guys don't mind. We can be cryptic if you want.
Does anyone have a question for Rebecca? And also I should say, Suzie and Rebecca will be signing books after, so you'll have another opportunity to maybe ask them some quick questions. But if you've got a question for Rebecca or Suzie at the front, I could get a microphone if you've got a question for either women.
It always takes one person to ask. Oh
yes,
question.
Suzie.
Amazing.
I can
You
repeat
can repeat it,
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So for people that didn't hear that, Suzie Miller asked if true crime is the new gossip and the way that we communicate now and has become part of our village.
Yeah, I think very much, right. I think gossip is also evolutionary. I really do. I taught elementary school for 12 years before my first book came out, and you might think I'm about to talk about the kids, but I'm going to talk about the parents. The parents would like these rumors, like parking lot gossip, and you had to be constantly on guard of like, how did this rumor get started? What is going on?
I think that's why Big Little Lies worked so
Yes,
well.
totally. It's very recognizable. But I think there were just always, within that group, there were just always a few self-appointed people who felt like they were just going to warn everybody of anything that might have been slightly amiss, or make sure everybody knew everything. And you think, okay, like what purpose did that serve for most of human history? Well, yeah, like the person who's kind of like standing up, looking out over the savannah or whatever, being like, I think that's a leopard. Everybody be careful, I think that's a leopard. Right? Is that, right? Just you need those people who are speculating, who are letting everyone know what they think. I think maybe, I don't know. And also, then as we come down to like, well, what happened to this person? This person has been killed. You need the people who are going to get over involved, who are going to speculate, who are going to figure it out. Here's the thing. It can be really fun, right? We just had in the U.S. There's this elaborate case in South Carolina with this very wealthy family. Basically a father who seems like he killed his wife and son, but just the number of podcasts and the number of, I think there was a HBO special and a documentary series and a Netflix one, I think, and the gossip around it was so fun. I can admit that. It was just so wild. It was so juicy. And this guy messed up hugely, and this was the most satisfying. Like, they got him in court with a surprise piece of evidence, and It was absolutely amazing. But yeah, it scratches that gossip itch totally. Yeah.
Any other questions? Yeah, I can see your hand there.
Hi, Rebecca. Thank you so much. I think what I have to ask is kind of a little bit of like a non-question, perhaps a little bit more of an observation. But I have noticed there have been a few titles published this year that have obviously done something similar but also different to what you've done, in like following a bit of a similar idea around there's a murder that takes place a few decades ago. They all seem to fall in the 90s. And then, it's the present day, and someone who was involved in the periphery finds themselves going back to their hometown to sort of try and reckon with that. I've read one or two of those and they were fine. Your book is marvellous.
Thank you.
But I guess I was just sort of like interested in terms of some of those, I guess, things that maybe happen in publishing. They all seem to kind of get released a little bit like around the same time, and if that was to what extent that was something in your awareness, not whilst you're writing it, but when it comes out, and you sort of look around, you're a little bit like, oh, yeah, this is sort of interesting.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think a lot of those are in maybe a little bit more of a real mystery genre than what I write and than what I read. I love a good mystery, but it just doesn't tend to be the book that I would pick up, and it's not the world I'm kind of steeped in. So it's not, I actually have not been looking around going, oh gosh, everyone's doing the same thing. But I do think that there is, there are just things in the zeitgeist. I don't think that it's necessarily about the publishing industry, but, in this moment when we're thinking about Me Too, in this moment when true crime is having us think back on unsolved cases, wrongly solved cases, would people be, especially, people around my age, I'm in my 40s, high school was the 90s. Can you see, several people wanting to write about that? It makes a lot of sense. The other one is books about podcasting. And, when I started this, I certainly don't think there were really, the first podcast anyone listened to was in like 2014, right? And I started writing this in 2018. There were not books about podcasters. And there have been a bunch now, specifically true crime podcasting. And again, it makes sense. It's in the zeitgeist. Also, I think it hands us a really plausible and likely citizen detective that someone like Agatha Christie would have killed for, or maybe literally, right? But she's got to come up with like Miss Marple for her citizen detective who just always happens to be there. Whereas, you get someone like a true crime podcaster, that is an actual thing. People are, they're not detectives, they're not police, they're investigating, they sometimes get things solved. This is a great gift to the mystery novel genre on the whole. So it makes sense, but it's funny to me because, of course, this being the length and the depth that it is, this book takes me, 4 years to write and another year to come out. And some of the true crime podcaster novels are the kind, which is, I think this is great, but they're the kind that, someone writes a book a year very quickly. And so by the time it comes out, once I'll get the question of like, why did you decide to jump on the bandwagon of like, oh, come on. I was writing this the whole time.
Yeah. We've probably got time for one more, if anyone else has a question. One over there.
Just a quick question. I loved your book, reading your book this year.
you.
I was wondering what books you've loved reading this year.
Ooh.
Do you have time?
Yeah, I do. That's a great question. I'm doing a project right now where I'm trying to read my way around the globe in translation. So it's a memorial to my father. He was a linguist and a literary translator, as well as a poet. And he passed away in 2020 in Hungary, and I wasn't able to get there, and so this is my memorial. But he lived to be 84, so I'm starting and ending in Hungary, and I'm trying to kind of, just country hop around. So I'm on maybe my 10th, 12th book now. I'm reading a novel from Lebanon at the moment. So going through the Arabian Peninsula, and then I'm going to go down the east coast of Africa, and so on and so on. So I'll give you two of my favorites from that list. One actually is the Hungarian novel I started with, which is one people kept asking me if I'd read, and I hadn't. It's called The Door by Magda Szabó. It is from the 80s, and it is about a woman's very, very strange housekeeper. And it's fascinating. And then the other one, another favorite, is this Turkish novel called Madonna in a Fur Coat, and the author is Sabahattin Ali. It was published in 1943, and nobody read it. And the author was killed by the government shortly thereafter. And it's about a Turkish man going to Germany and having a kind of doomed love affair. For the past 5 years, it has been the best-selling novel in Turkey. Wow. And I think it has a lot to do with younger readers. There's some really twisting of gender norms in this book, and I think for younger Turkish readers, given the oppressive government they have, they're really drawn to that. It's very, very readable. It's very fast. It's really beautiful. So I recommend both of those very much. And I'm going to keep going. It's going to take me a few years, to be clear, to do this all, because I have other obligations. But I'm like, every one that I read, I'm like posting about it on social media, and I have a Substack newsletter, and I have people reading with me and comparing notes, and it's been really fun.
That's great. You need one of those globe scratch maps.
Yes.
Scratch off a country.
I'm doing, when I post, I figured out a way to get a little map online where I can click the mouse on the countries and it colors it in, which is very satisfying.
That concludes our event for tonight. I'd like to thank our amazing Auslan interpreters, Linda and Leah. Thank you so much. And of course, a huge thanks to Rebecca and Suzie.
Thank you so much.
You can buy their books and mine our Spring Fling bookseller readings has copies available for purchase, and we'll all be signing upstairs in the salon after the event, and ushers can direct you where to go if you'd like to buy some books. So thank you, kind thanks to everyone for coming along tonight.